Hi, I'm Leah and this is Filter-Free Photography. Today I'm going to be talking about the Pentax-m 85mm f2. If you've looked at my other videos, you might be wondering why I chose to do this lens specifically and why I bought this lens specifically. Unlike the other lenses that I've reviewed, like the 50mm 1.4 and the Jupiter 9, this is not a cult classic lens and isn't talked about as much today, at least amongst people who are adapting vintage lenses to mirrorless cameras. The Pentax people know about it a little bit. I've read on the forums people talking about it, but it certainly doesn't have the notoriety that some other lenses have, like the Jupiter 9. So the main reason that I wanted to talk about this lens is that I had looked at the Jupiter 9, and I'm always on the lookout for a good vintage portrait length lens. So portrait length being, we'll define it as maybe 70 to 100 millimeters. And this fit the bill, and it was also the smallest and cheapest of the vintage Pentax primes for that focal length. The Jupiter 9, I think I picked up for probably a bit over $100, and then I picked up this for about $100 more than that. So unlike the Jupiter 9 or any Soviet lens, where there was a lot of quality control issues and the lenses can really vary on a case-by-case basis, this lens is part of the Pentax-m vintage series of lenses in the 70s and 80s, and they all tend to be pretty good. They had good quality control, and you can predict that you're going to get something good with it. And what you get with this lens is something that seems really attractive. First, it's the lightest 85mm lens that I've ever held. So I have a Leica Summicron that's very heavy. That's a 90 f2, and it's more than twice the weight of this. The Jupiter 9 was at least 100 grams more than this, at least the version that I had. This is actually on its own a little bit less than the Sony 55mm 1.8 and definitely less than the Sony 85mm 1.8. And so it really represents a super small, compact, economical portrait lens. A couple things to know about this lens. First of all, it's not only the lightest and the cheapest that Pentax at the time had to offer, it is also supposed to be the worst of those lenses. So they had 85mm 1.8s on their different sort of editions of lenses, such as the Pentax A, Pentax K, and the M42 mounts. This one is labeled Pentax M, which was their lineup that was supposed to go with things like the Pentax MX as space saving. It's supposed to be light and not take up very much room. And that really goes along with the aesthetic of the modern mirrorless cameras quite well. So something that you might not like about this lens is that it has 6 blades. I am cool with that. I like hexagons. I'd prefer it to an 8-bladed lens. I feel like there's arguments that if it's not perfectly round, it's going to make the bokeh busier in the background. But if it's going to have that busy bokeh, I'd prefer to have a 6-sided shape just because I like them better compared to an 8-sided shape. I think that I've been affected by all those signs all over the city that say no octagons. And just to show you, this is the PK to E-mount adapter. So it's about that big on its own. And then if I put it onto my Sony a7 II, you can see it's actually quite small, quite light. It feels quite similar really to having the Sony 55mm on it, which is really astounding if you think about that it's an 85mm lens that does open to f2. So without further ado, I'm going to show you some pictures that I took with my Sony a7 II during a paid shoot in a provincial park. And then I will, at the end of that, show you some pictures that I took on black and white film with my Pentax MX. Okay, so now that we've looked at some pictures, there's some things that I want to point out to you about them. First, the quality of the bokeh, because that's what people are going to be wondering about with this right away, because of those 6 blades, that hexagon shape that you get. And first off, it's easy to say you're never going to have to worry about it as a portrait lens, just because it actually works quite well wide open, where the Jupiter 9 gave me this soft glow, especially if I was shooting anywhere near a light source, and the contrast reduced sharply. The pentax-m 85mm f2 actually works pretty well even at f2 for portrait pictures. So compare this photo to this next one, and you'll see that not only does the bokeh and the sharpness look good at f2, but by stopping down to f2.8, we actually don't get that much of a busier background the way that people might expect. It looks sharp at both. It gets a little bit sharper at f2.8, but you get a nice soft background for both. So let's talk a bit more about sharpness. These pictures were taken at f2, and if I look at the corners, it's actually amazing that a lens this old, maybe 30 years old, is actually capturing corner sharpness at this level. There's a little bit of violet fringing that makes it look a little bit blurrier, but the amount of detail that you can actually see in those corners is fantastic. I never felt like I had to stop down. And when I did stop down, the bokeh didn't really change that much, and the sharpness just got a little bit better. One of the negatives that this lens does have, though, however, is that the bokeh is never perfect. It's never going to match a modern 9-bladed aperture with rounded blades. It doesn't have the completely soft background. It looks a little bit busy wide open, but it looks about the same amount of busy a little bit stopped down. So you don't have to worry about stopping down or opening up with this lens. It looks pretty consistent. And when you're shooting, consistency is actually a pretty good thing, because then you can concentrate on what aperture you want and what shutter speed you want, and not what your lens is going to be doing. Other negatives with this lens, it does produce a lot of flaring if you go looking for it anyway. So I shot a couple shots straight into the sun, and not only can you get some pretty strong flares and reducing of contrast with this, but you can also get this crazy looking red ring phenomenon towards the bottom. But honestly, you would see it if that was going to happen. It's not a big issue, and I only produce these things by really attempting to get them. So all in all, I would say that this is probably one of the best purchases that I've made as I've been looking for vintage lenses, just because it's super light. I can just throw it into a bag in the way that I never could with my Leica lens. It's lighter than any of my other Sony lenses, and it still looks great on a modern camera, and it's easy to focus, and I get good results from it. If you're looking for an 85mm f2 lens, this vintage lens really delivers. Despite it supposedly being the worst of the Pentax 85s from that era, it still looks really great. It seems super sharp to me. I like the hexagon backgrounds in the bokeh balls, and its handling and mechanics are smooth and they feel really good. It feels like it's a quality lens. So thanks for watching. If you have any questions about this lens or any comments about this or any other Pentax lens, adapted to E-mount or otherwise, please comment below. Otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.